Right, welcome back, students. Today we're going to cover chapters 5 through 10 of Ulysses, Flora and Ulysses by Katie Camillo. Right, chapter 5, The Squirrel Obliges. Something strange had happened to the squirrel's brain. Things had gone black, and then into the blackness there came a light so beautiful, so bright that the squirrel had to turn away. A voice spoke to him. "What's that?" said the squirrel. The light shone brighter. The voice spoke again. "Okay," said the squirrel, "you bet." He wasn't sure what exactly he was agreeing to, but it didn't matter. He was just so happy. He was floating in a great lake of light, and the voice was singing to him. Oh, it was wonderful. It was the best thing ever. And there was a loud noise. The squirrel heard another noise. The voice was counting. The light receded. "Breathe," the new voice shouted. The squirrel obliged. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and then another, and another. The squirrel returned. Chapter 6. In the event of a seizure. "Well, he's breathing," said Mrs. Tickman. "Yes," said Flora, "he is." She felt a swell of pride. The squirrel rolled over onto his stomach. He raised his head. His eyes were glazed. "For heaven's sake," said Mrs. Tickman, "look at him." She chuckled quietly. She shook her head. Then she laughed out loud. She kept laughing. She laughed and laughed and laughed. She laughed so hard that she started to shake. Was she having some kind of fit? Flora tried to remember what terrible things can happen to you, advised in the event of a seizure. It has something to do with moving the tongue out of the way or stabilizing it with a stick or something. Flora had saved the squirrel's life. She didn't see any reason she couldn't save Mrs. Tickman's tongue. The sun sank a little lower on the sky. Mrs. Tickman continued to laugh hysterically, and Flora Bell Buckman started looking around Tickman's backyard for a stick. Chapter 7. The Soul of a Squirrel. The squirrel was still unsteady on his feet. His brain felt larger, roomier. It was as if several doors in a dark room of his self, doors he didn't even know existed, had suddenly been flung wide. Everything was shot through with meaning, purpose, light. However, the squirrel was still a squirrel. He was hungry. Very. Sniffing underneath the vacuum. Who can say what astonishments are hidden inside the most mundane being? He's like, ta-da! I've got the crackers! Lifting up the vacuum cleaner. Chapter 8. Helpful information. Flora and Mrs. Tickman noticed at the same time. "The squirrel," said Flora. "The vacuum cleaner," said Mrs. Tickman. Together they stared at the Ulysses 2000X and at the squirrel who was holding it over his head with one paw. "That can't be," said Mrs. Tickman. The squirrel shook the vacuum cleaner. "That can't be," said Miss Tickman. "You already said that," said Flora. "I'm repeating myself." "You're repeating yourself." "Maybe I have a brain tumor," said Miss Tickman. It was certainly possible that Mrs. Tickman had a brain tumor. Flora knew from reading Terrible Things Can Happen to You that a surprising number of people are walking around with tumors in their brains and didn't even know it. That was the thing about tragedy. It was just sitting there keeping you company, waiting, and you had absolutely no idea. This is the kind of helpful information you can get from comics if you paid attention. The other kind of information that you absorb from regular reading of comics, most particularly from the regular reading of the illuminated adventures of the amazing Incandesto, was that impossible things happen all the time. For instance, heroes, superheroes were born of ridiculous and unlikely circumstances. Spider bites, chemical spills, planetary dislocation, and in the case of Alfred T. Slipper, from accidental submersion in an industrial-sized vat of cleaning solution called Incandesto, the cleaning professional's hardworking friend. "I don't think you have a brain tumor," said Flora. "There might be another explanation." "Uh-huh," said Mrs. Tickman. "What's the other explanation?" "Have you ever heard of Incandesto?" "What?" said Mrs. Tickman. "Who?" said Flora. "Incandesto is a who. He's a superhero." "Right," said Mrs. Tickman. "And your point is?" Flora raised her right hand. She pointed with a single finger at the squirrel. "Surely you're not implying," said Miss Tickman. The squirrel lowered the vacuum cleaner to the ground. He held himself very still. He considered both of them. His whiskers twitched and trembled. There were cracker crumbs on his head. He was a squirrel. Could he be a superhero too? Alfred T. Slipper was a janitor most of the time. People looked right past him. Sometimes, often in fact, they treated him with disdain. They had no idea of the astonishing acts of heroism the blinding light contained within this outward humdrum disguise. Only Alfred's parakeet, Dolores, knew who he was and what he could do. The world will misunderstand him, said Flora. You bet it will, said Mrs. Tigman. Tootie, shouted Mr. Tigman from the back door. Tootie, I'm hungry. Tootie? What a ridiculous name. Flora couldn't resist the urge to say it out loud. Tootie, she said. Tootie Tigman. Listen, Tootie, go inside. Feed your husband. Say nothing to him or anyone else about any of this. Right, said Tootie. Say nothing. Feed my husband. Okay, right. She began walking slowly toward the house. Mr. Tigman called out, Are you done vacuuming? What about Ulysses? Are you just going to leave it sitting there? Ulysses, whispered Flora. She felt a shiver run back the back of her head to the base of her spine. She might be a natural-born cynic, but she knew the right word when she heard it. Ulysses, she said again. She bent down, held her hand out to the squirrel. Come here, Ulysses, she said. Chapter 9, The World Was on Fire. Okay. The world on fire. She spoke to him, and he understood her. What the girl said was, Ulysses, come here, Ulysses, and without thinking, he moved toward her. It's okay, she said, and he believed her. It was astonishing. Everything was astonishing. The setting sun was illuminating each blade of grass. It was reflecting off the girl's glasses, making a halo of light around the girl's round head, setting the whole world afire. The squirrel thought, when did these things become so beautiful? And if it had always been this way all along, how is it that I never noticed before? Listen to me, the girl said. My name is Flora. Your name is Ulysses. Okay, thought the squirrel. She put her hand on him. She picked him up. She cradled him in her left arm. She felt nothing but happiness. He felt nothing but happiness. Why had he always been so terrified of humans? He couldn't imagine. Actually, he could imagine. There had been that time with the boy and the BB gun. There had truthfully been a lot of incidents with humans, some involving BB guns, some not. And all of them have been violent, terrifying, and soul-destroying. But this was a new life, and he was a changed squirrel. He felt spectacular, strong, smart, capable, and also hungry. He was very, very hungry. Chapter 10, Squirrel Smuggling. Flora's mother was in the kitchen. She was typing. She wrote on an old typewriter. When she pounded the keys, the kitchen table shook, and the plates on the shelves rattled, and the silverware in the drawers cried out in a metallic kind of alarm. Flora had decided that this was the part of the reason her parents had divorced. Not the noise of the writing, but the writing itself, specifically the writing of romance. Flora's father had said, I think that your mother is so in love with her books about love that she doesn't love me anymore. And her mother had said, your father is so far off in left field, he wouldn't even recognize love if it stood up in his soup and sang. Flora had a hard time imagining what love would be doing standing in a bowl of soup and singing. But these were the kinds of idiotic words her parents spoke, and they said the words to each other even though they were pretending that they were talking to Flora. It was all very annoying. What are you doing? Her mother said to Flora. She was sucking on a Pizza Pop. It made her words sound rocky and sharp-edged. Her mother used to smoke and then she stopped, but still had to have something in her mouth when she typed. So she consumed a lot of Pizza Pops. This one was orange-flavored. Flora could smell it. Oh, nothing, said Flora. She glanced at the squirrel in her arms. Good, said her mother. She whacked the carriage return on the typewriter without looking up. She kept typing. Are you still standing there? Her mother said. She typed some more words. She hit the carriage return again. I'm in a deadline here. So hard to concentrate with you standing over there breathing, standing over me breathing like that. I could stop breathing, said Flora. Oh, don't be ridiculous, said her mother. Go upstairs, wash your hands. We're going to eat soon. Okay, said Flora. She walked past her mother and into the living room, still carrying Ulysses in the crook of her arm. It didn't seem possible, but it was true. She had smuggled a squirrel into the house, and she had done it right under her mother's nose, or behind her back, or something. In the living room at the base of the stairs, the little shepherdess lamp was waiting, a pink-cheeked smirk plastered on her face. Flora hated the little shepherdess. Her mother had brought the lamp with her first royalty check from her first book, On Feathered Wings of Joy, which was the stupidest title for a book that Flora had ever heard in her life. Her mother had sent away to London for the lamp. When it arrived, she unpacked it and plugged it in. Then she clapped her hands and said, "Oh, she's so beautiful. Isn't she beautiful? I love her with all my heart." Flora's mother had never called Flora beautiful. She'd never said that she loved her with all of her heart. Luckily, Flora was a cynic and didn't care whether her mother loved her or not. "I think that I will call her Mary Ann," her mother had said. "Mary Ann," said Flora. "You're going to name a lamp?" "Mary Ann, shepherdess to the lost," said her mother. "Who's lost exactly?" said Flora. But her mother hadn't bothered to answer that question. "This," Flora said to the squirrel, "is the little shepherdess. Her name is Mary Ann. Unfortunately, she lives here too." The squirrel considered Mary Ann. Flora narrowed her eyes and stared at the lamp. She knew it was ridiculous, but sometimes she felt as if Mary Ann knew something she didn't know, that the little shepherdess was keeping some dark, terrible secret. "You stupid lamp," said Flora. "Mind your own business, mind your sheep." Actually, there was just one sheep, a tiny lamb curled up in Mary Ann's pink-slippered feet. Flora always wanted to say to the little shepherdess, "If you're such a great shepherdess, where are the rest of your sheep, huh?" "She can just ignore. We can just ignore her," said Flora to Ulysses. She turned away from the smug, glowing Mary Ann and climbed the stairs to her room, holding Ulysses gently, carefully in her arms. He didn't glow, but he was surprisingly warm for someone so small. All right, so that's the end of chapter 10. A couple of things for you to ask about with these chapters. For one thing, comparing how Flora's mother feels about Mary Ann versus how she feels about Flora. I mean, there's definitely a difference, at least how we see it so far. Remember, the story is being told through the eyes of Flora. You know, it's obviously a novel, and it's written through the eyes of Flora, the young girl in the story. So everything is from her perspective, how she sees her parents, how she sees the world, how she sees her comic books, everything. And how does Ulysses change right after being sucked up? Well, we know he suddenly has super strength. He held a vacuum cleaner over his head. He's losing a lot of hair, and we're going to see some other things that come from him as well. There's some good questions about superheroes. What do you think you're going to have? What kind of superhero powers would you want to have if you were a squirrel? And then Flora judges her parents' words, and her mom judges what Flora reads. So you can kind of compare how they judge each other, you know, what kind of books they like to read, and they sort of judge each other based off of what they enjoy. You know, Flora looks at comic books all the time, and her mom is a romance novelist, so there's a lot of difference in those two kinds of reading styles, right? All right, Flora's mom says she loves Mary Ann, her lamp, with all my heart. However, she's never said that to Flora, her daughter. Flora claims she doesn't care whether her mom loves her or not. So you think that's true or not? Okay. Remember, you know, it's from Flora's perspective. And then, of course, look back at the illustrations that we've seen so far about Flora's emotions. You can kind of see how she feels. Right there, she looks a little bit sad or a little bit confused about this little squirrel character here. Okay. You kind of pay attention to the picture and see just the look on her face. All right, that's it for these chapters. We'll catch base on the next one for the next group of chapters. Thank you, guys.